My name's Chris Erridge. I'm born in 1942, June the 10th. Same birthday as the Duke of Edinburgh, I'm pleased to say. And so we can go on from that. I've lived mainly around Eastbourne, apart from stints in London for a couple of years in the 60s and Birmingham a couple of years in the 60s. Mainly a lot of around the town, etc. Association with London, boxing, music, etc. So basically here, the barber shop, as Tom knows, from a young lad, I might add. My earliest memory, one that sticks in my mind, was when I was 3 years old, along with a lad called Billy Randalls, who was an Elvis Presley nut, bless him, passed away at 18. I'd like to mention Billy on camera for memory's sake. But playing with Billy in the soot, halfway down Northbourne Road, when the doodlebugs were coming across, for some unknown reason that stays in my mind. Namely because I had to send a search party out to look for us, police, etc. And found us somehow. How I ever got down there, I can't remember. Or does Billy? We spoke about it years on, but there you go. That's my earliest memory. Yeah. Well, the big time that you remember after the war was the humble upbringing, not being over the top on that matter, living in a house with an outside toilet, as many of us did. Small house, but it was a way of life that was not. You accepted it. It meant nothing. It was beautiful times, comradeship, and playing, emulating films, dressing up as soldiers, and ration books. Yeah, that was pretty good. And along came youth club days. Rock and roll was just in its infancy, coming off the radio stations of Luxembourg, and then the rock pirate ships. And you wanted to be a rock and roll star. Lonnie Donegan was the biggest influence appertaining to that particular point on music. 3 calls and off you went. And then you were in a youth club, which was a great upbringing. And choir, you sang in choir, so your voice got trained. So all these wonderful girls, and it was a fashionable, great era of dress and code, which goes on even now, no matter what route it takes. So yeah, those were the early days. Basically, there were certain parts of these. One sticks in mind where a lot of parts of the bombing was, and where Marks and Spencer's now is in Terminus Road was a massive great hole where it was bombed. And I do remember when Moby Dick the film came out, they actually brought Moby Dick on a big trailer to Eastbourne and put it in there because it was a large enough gap to put it in. So that was one part of the bombing of the history. Sake. I don't remember the library being bombed. We had a wonderful library. It was well, state of the art. It was far better than the one we got now in design. It was fantastic. But that was another one. But I don't recall that. But in quick direct answer to that question, yeah, Bobby's where Marks and Spencer's where that big whale's at. It's changed an awful lot when Dad was invalided out of the Navy. My dad and my mum were that, and we saw the changes taking place where we lived, because behind us was Caffins, where the MFI roundabout, as they call it, although MFI's not there anymore. But beyond that was all bulrushes, where we used to play as kids and make camps, all that straight out the old Starlini Blighton books. And venture was taken all across there. Many guys my age and girls and all that. Rambles, youth club rambles, and everything took place all the way across there. Even painted a car over there once. 2 cars, in fact. Hand painted. Because we couldn't afford to. Well, that goes on to another story. But yeah, right across there, the Prince's Park was already built. There was a wonderful Eastbourne United, which was still going, but it was at its legendary times during those pre-war days and after and beyond. The swimming pool, Devonshire Bars, was active for years and years. I trained down there, swam down there, competed. All my scuba diving training was done down there. So there was another landmark that went, unfortunately. Seawater, beautiful. Built the one close to the sea and filled it with fresh water. Bit odd. Various other parts came. Hampden Park grew, sort of joined to Eastbourne. Polegate's joined to Eastbourne. It wasn't like that. Where I went to school, out in the country, back in those early days of the 40s, Swallow's Nest was a country school. I couldn't go to St Andrews, which was 200 or 300 yards from where I lived, some boundary line, some mathematical problem, whatever. I had to go out to this country school, which beyond Langley wasn't built. So beyond it, onto Stones Cross, before Stones Cross, was a school called in Friday Street, which was Beggar's Lane, Oak Tree Lane, changed it because of the beggar part to it. And there were 3 prominent houses down there which were turned into, this particular one was turned into an all-educational school. So you went from your infants, junior, seniors, and then as years went by, it changed that. And I had to come back into Eastbourne to be well, to do my senior training, education, so to speak. So there's those changes, and as I said, the swimming pool came, all that got built over, but it was lovely marshland right the way through. And so there we have the harbour there now. The harbour was obviously there. Although it was designed, there was a design done in 1845 for that harbour, so it took Eastbourne a long time to build that harbour. I've got the map of that and the plans and all the paperwork of that. So it's crazy. The idea goes back long before that. It took Eastbourne a long, long time to make its mind up on that particular part. So various other parts, yeah. The pier's still there, even though unfortunately the fires that's been done several times before. Back in the 70s it was done by a guy who used to come in the shop, ironically. But that was satellite, yeah. Oh yeah, he was at it, and he said that he liked to see things go up in smoke. Started with the garden shed, but there's another story. And so, we'll go from there. The railway station's still the same, although around it has changed quite a lot. And the music venues there was lots of music venues in the pubs, clubs. Panorama Coffee Bar was a classic of those early child influence of music. Along came the coffee bars. You know, that Continental was famous for many guys like Bowie came down, the Quo, the Who. I've got flyers on that to tell the story. The wonderful story of Malcolm Diplock and the Laughing Gnome. The Laughing Gnome, the track, was written on Malcolm Diplock, yeah. And so they were Leapy Lee, born out of the coffee bar of the Panorama. And the Urchins skiffle group, there's a story in itself, which I've got some photographs of in the Panorama, fortunately. They had Finch's, which was more the continental style coffee bars, which was good because all the Swedish girls came, French girls came, Germans, so that was quite an influence on a young lad. So, and then the Boxers and the Beanie Brothers and Rakes, so they were all around at that time, and they fought for the Lynn Club out of London. Mike Beanie boxed for England, and Mike's still about. He's a doctor. He's an interesting character. I've got some photographs on that when he was in the England squad with a famous boxer called Joe Bugner. And so, Mike was a really good boxer. And so he's still about. He's interviewable. And got to go on that score. Again, I've got a guy called Dave Connolly who's got a scrapyard. I've known Dave for a long, serious amount of time. Great guy. Very big in motorbike enthusiast, got quite a few old motorbikes. But Dave's in the Eastbourne Vehicle Heritage Society, commercial vehicles, moreover. And he asked me once in a project, so I've asked several people, and I've got all the history of A-vans, haulage, which started off with a horse and cart, and done laundry in one part of the day and groceries in the second part. I've got a lovely photograph of this. Very much like Brewers have kindly gave me their history with a sidecar and a ladder. And all this, steam engines, that's more to do with A-vans. One of their first lorries was a steam lorry. It was an amazing piece of equipment. But all these wonderful firms that went on, Llewellyn's, the early days of a cart and barrow, and then went on to build Southcliffe Towers and various other massive projects. And those guys, Russell Asphalt's the asphalt company, which was down what was the old Drove, which is now obviously a motorway down there, 2 lanes either way. But in my day, it was just pitch black, and you went across there in the dark, a little humpback bridge. And then when I came back from living in London or Birmingham, I can't recall which one now, it was all done, it was all gone. So that part was a bit of a shock to me personally. So that part coinciding with the changes of Eastbourne was massive. It started with a guy that I used to go to Swallow's Nest with at the country school I aforementioned. I was fascinated because in those days when growing up, this wonderful thing, the radio, was such an adventure because your head was telling the picture. It was just a wonderful invention, as like reading a book. And Tommy Williams and I were fascinated by the brown bomber, Joe Louis, that came across the radio when listening with my dad. And the sound of boxing to me was impregnated in my brain. It's still there. I would defend it till the cows come home for various educational reasons as well, which is quite a big project, which I could go further into. But back in those days, that boxing was with me all the time. And went on, done a little bit at school, but I was more into my swimming and competing, and never had, I can't really claim to any massive connection physically with me with boxing, apart from loving the game and always following it, always reading it every day of my life. I got fortunately connected with Frank Maloney's team via a guy called Vince Ekman, and we put a show on in Eastbourne, a pro show, back in 1989. But by then I'd learned a lot of the history of Eastbourne and its boxing with the King's Arms, and Randolph Turpin, famous middleweight boxer who beat the great Sugar Ray Robinson. They used to train down there, Bruce Woodcock, Lou Savold, Freddie Mills, rakes of others. But there was also, and I got photographs of a wonderful amateur gym there, which a lot of good guys trained and fought out of. Ted Moon, for example, who fought the finest Dick McTaggart at the Winter Garden in Eastbourne. So you have a great deal of that. Various other guys put shows on. Dave Payne had a big gym down the Dicker, Upper Dicker, who went to live in Lanzarote. I knew Dave. And then the other one, Mickey Lane, who took Craig Parsons to the junior light heavyweight ABA title, who lives in Hailsham to this day, whom I might add I took up to meet Frank Maloney because he was thinking about turning pro. Quite a story to that. Went up several times to the gym in the Old Kent Road called Henry Cooper. There's a gym upstairs at Teddy Haynes, beautiful, beautiful man. Listened to Craig and Darryl, his pal, who was a heavyweight. They were both heavyweights. Craig was a good boxer. I like Craig, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. He got ripped off against Joe Bugner's boy in the finals, and he never went back boxing basically again. But then you have a lot of good guys come from Hailsham. A lot of really, really good guys that went pro. The Townsend, Graham Townsend, who fought Robin Reed, who was world middleweight champion at the time, a very good Liverpool fighter. He went 6 rounds with him, if my memory serves me correct. Stan corrected Graham Townsend. I got that right. But a lot of history in Eastbourne, untold history of boxing. A lot of good guys, yeah. Music, well, I'll start with that, apart from what I've mentioned about my youth and getting involved in playing with a few bands, and one or two of those guys I said had their touches of fame. And Eddie Sargent, great guitar player, great singer to this day. A lot of time for Eddie, a lot of time for all those guys. Calvin Message, who I see every week, still learning at 73, trying. Bless you, Kelvin. Laurie Brookman, and you got Billy Contreras, Top of the Pops with Billy J. Kramer stories. Rakes of stories of guys in Eastbourne who had their little touches. And Billy once said he started at the bottom of the ladder of the rock and roll fame, liked it there so much, stayed there. And it goes on like that. Music, let's take Denny Lane. Denny Lane, who came to live down here. From Wings and Moody Blues, the original Moody Blues, whose guitar I once played in a barber shop in Birmingham when I was living up there. And he was skin. They got ripped off Moody Blues. They were one of the first bands to self-manage themselves. But when they came back, I stand corrected, but they came back without him, and there was a different format style. The Moody Blues, a lot of you young ones remember the original Moody Blues, like records like Go Now. So they came to live via Led Zeppelin's manager, Peter Grant, who used to come in the shop. Lovely guy, I got him in famous. I never ever once spoke to him about his fame, and I just spoke to him like any ordinary guy. He treated me just the same. We used to come to a lot of music stuff that I was involved with, invite him and he would turn up. We had a battle of the bands at what was then the Sherlock Holmes, and Chris Islip, bless his heart, he listened, and they took out all the Baker Street shops that they put in there, put a stage in, and it went back to the old music hall that it once was in my youth. Many bands handled through there. Some great nights. I've got the footage on film of that. That one did work. A guy called Graham French was the sound guy in those days, and another guy who's fails me at the moment. But none the more for that. We had some great times there. Great bands came through there. And Peter Grant came down several times judging. He came to the Winter Garden when we raised a lot of money for, sadly, a door guy, Tony Rogers, who sadly, well, that was a fatality. And the door guys of Eastbourne kind of see me. Put on, so 7 bands was organised for the Winter Garden to raise money for the family, to which we cordially gave the family. But I'll give Peter Grant his due. He came to see me the following day. He was not happy with the charges that we incurred at the Winter Garden. I personally didn't want it there, but Dav, one of the bounce guys, lovely guy. I love Dav. I know him. He's a good man. And he wanted it there. I can understand it. But Peter Grant came by and gave us a cheque for 150 quid, which was our own personal insurance we had to take out on the event. I mean, that's a place for Eastbourne. It's Eastbourne's place. Why did we have to pay that? And it was one of the door guys that look after places like that. It didn't work in my book. But so we raised a few quid on that, you know, but half of it went to Eastbourne. 2,400, if my memory serves me correctly. 1,200 obviously went to the expenses. 1,200 plus Peter Grant's cheque the following day. We sat in the barber shop, the old barber shop, and he was just like any other guy to me. And he said, you incurred? I said, yeah. And he went, yeah. I went to his funeral because of that, you know, because he was never in my face about what he'd done with Led Zeppelin or Adam Faith or Free or any of those other bands he was involved with, because he was involved with not just Led Zeppelin. He'd been a wrestler, but he was certainly was a manager. And it can go on to other, Cliff Richard's bit comes into it, and especially when Tony Kenwood used to put on the bands, the rock and roll nights of getting all the old bands. They said the Alexanders reformed on a reunion night, and they went on for years, till about 2 or 3 years ago. They played for us at the charity do down at Fisherman's Club, if you remember. But they were born out of these evenings, and what Tony always used to do, Tony Kenwood, Diabo out of 54321, what's that record? Manfred Mann. He was involved with them, and they put on, they had the Searchers with them, and they had the Trogs, and they always used to put another, but really could have run on its own, just with Eastbourne's memorable bands from the coffee bar days. Because everybody went that used to go to these coffee bars, so really didn't need. But then that's Tony, and I've got a lot of respect for Tony Kenwood, big time, with the Saints, and he's just at the back end, unfortunately, but you could go on to them. All these guys will give you stories far beyond what I'm giving you, and they all had their touches of fame. Laurie Brookman. The mobiles, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. The mobiles, as young kids, you always used to come into the shop, and I had this feeling that, like, somewhere down the line, Eddie and John Smithson, and with the lads, Paul Watson, all that, they were going to, because they were involved in musical from a very early age, and it went through, and suddenly Mobiles was born, the record Drown in Berlin, I stand correctly, got to number 9 in the charts, and Eddie didn't forget the days when I used to say to him, don't forget us when you found fame and fortune. And he said, phoned me up one day, he said, that day's happened, Chris. Where they want to do a day in the life of the Mobiles from Eastbourne. But we're not doing it unless we come down and to the shop. And they filmed there. The Mobiles have got to get their haircuts, and we designed this bowl haircut. They wanted something different. Everybody had all the, whatever it was at the time, long hair, short hair. So they wanted it, a 40s round, an army, old haircut, you know, when days were just cut round in a bowl, became a fashionable design later on. So the 30-man film crew came down with the guy that was directing it all. He's now quite famous, I forget his name, but he was in ITV. He was on talking about the problems we got in the world at the moment the other night. But he was a young roving guy for the camera guy, stroke director, stroke everything. But 13 people in their tiny shop with a clapperboard saying, don't worry how many times we take this. I told him to throw it away, we didn't need it, which he did, and he done it in one take. So hopefully this one we're doing now is done in one take. So that was good, and they went on to have their little bit of fame and fortune like other bands after, Top Loader, etc., and many other, good guys. Yeah, a lot of respect for a lot of those musicians, always have had, yeah. The barber shop, which I personally wasn't back in, I used to do a little bit on the side, but I'd come way out of it and lived away, not just London and Birmingham, various other bits and pieces. But I got this opportunity came for a very, very old lad called Jack Norley, who was an old friend of, he was the father of an old friend of mine who wanted me to come back in and treated me like a son with respect to my mum and dad. Don't get me wrong, not being mushy on this. But he did. He said, Chris, I want to retire and I just want to walk out the shop. So in October 1970, I did. And then after 6 months, I got along, and Barry, my partner, we were apprentices together back in those early days. And so it made sense that he came with us, and that's how Chris and Barris was born. He came in 6 months after, and then we approach it probably a lot different than other barbershops. Although that's respect, I respect my trade, but we've played it down. We just have a good time. Have had for 45 years. That's not saying they don't have a good time in other shops. You get my drift. It's been a bit of a spit and sawdust, but down to earth sort of barbershop, I like to think, where anybody can say what they want, But it's been good. It's good. It was good. And we're just grazing in the field cutting hair now, but that was 45 years on with wonderful stories of many guys, from opera to gangsters, to priests, to young lads growing up to be good musicians and have recorded studios. Some boxers, some write books, their fathers. Many guys that come in the shop have written books. That's cool. That's really cool. And they sell quite well. Well, they did when they come out, but bit by bit they've dwindled, but that's cool. Okay. That's briefly the barbershop, but it's got many, many untold stories. Being set up with a drunk one day back in the 80s, yeah, that stands out big time. I was pretty fit then. Karate and gyms, I was pretty fit. And yeah, they set me up because we'd had a lot of problems around that area, and a lot of our customers, as I said, they're quite earthy and they're quite wind-up merchants. And this very fit fireman from Birmingham, he was a cousin of a very good friend of mine, Steve Tripp, who had Stones Cross Motors. Lovely guy, Steve. American cars come into this because I had a Mustang for about 10 years through Steve. So I'd met his cousin Chris, and he was a wind-up merchant. He would abseil off of any mountain for charity, and did do. Or Blackpool Tower, for example, and things. Crazy. Pothole scuba diving, for example. So Chris was a pretty fit guy also. But he was also very good. I made him up very well, and he bulldozed his way. I'm cutting the story down because he bulldozed his way into the shop, drunk. Oh, so I thought. And I had to evict him, which I might modestly say I did in a very quick way, which rather surprised him because he was a quick, fit guy. So I'm not proclaiming to be some heavy, no way which way. But I did know a couple of moves which absolutely worked that day. And he ended up with a big head on his forehead because he hit the concrete outside. So that one sticks in the mind, which he did do it well, and I did lose it with my mate Steve for not helping me eject it. But of course I was all in on it, and that set me up. Yeah, and one or two mistakes in hairdressing that with Barry and I have both done, put our hands up to, they're quite legendary. Cutting somebody's hair too short one day, Barry. Me putting a scar in somebody's head one day, that was another one. So that's all honesty. And I'm sure any barber watching this, I hope they're watching this, you've all done it. But there's lots of good music stories and funny stories of boxing matches that we've been to. Legendary stories of Stumpy and the pub in the Old Kent Road, and Stumpy getting drunk and hitting the bar. Stumpy, when I put Nigel Ben in the back of his head, cut it freehand, no stencils. That was a good one. And, other ones, legendary Chris and Barry's Christmas raffle. Rather interesting prizes on that one. But a lot of good characters with their own stories of, yeah. A guy that used to visit us every time he used to come out of prison that we'd known since a little boy, and tried to guide him in our modest way. But he ended up doing a lot of time. But every time he came out, he used to come and see us. First thing he did when he got off the train, at whatever prison he was in, he used to come down and see us. There are lots of stories like that. Yeah. Mahmood. And there's a guy in town called Chris Payne. Lovely, lovely guy. He was very first. He was a punk before anybody was a punk, with green hair, blue hair, everything. He was a hairdresser guy. But he was also great into pets and everything. And he loved dogs and horses, and still does to this day. I saw him before Christmas. And he came up to me, he said, "You remember Mahmood?" I said, "Oh my goodness grief, yeah." The local rag were doing a story on his dog, Mahmood, the Afghan hound, because it had made Crufts. And for a solo man to get his dog to Crufts was amazing. So they're going to do a feature on him. And they wanted to come down the shop and take photographs of me doing this dog's hair, putting rollers in it. Well, there's no way on this planet that I want anybody seeing me do this. So I agreed to do it because Chris was an old friend of my wife's, Lynn, from the school days and neighbourhood days. The only reason I did it. With the proviso that they wouldn't put it on the front page of the Gazette. I didn't want it. And they'd only show this part of my body and my arms, because I didn't want no publicity. I'd get slaughtered. And well, you can imagine what happened. It did. It went on the front page in a photograph like that. Massive photograph. And I had everybody phoning me up wanting to do their dogs there. Some wind up, some not. Little old grannies phoning me up. Every time we went into the Fisherman's Club, everybody would do the dog, woof, woof, woof. Anywhere, everywhere I went, guys would lean out of cars and that was a hoot. And Mahmood went off to Crufts, but I've got that photograph upstairs, unbelievable. There is full front photograph with rollers putting into the dog's hair. That was a cool one. Yeah. The scuba diving, yeah, that was back in 1970, 71, because I'd gone back into hairdressing. The jobs I was doing, they kept me quite fit, and I wanted to keep fit. And I always wanted to do scuba diving, and it became quite affordable because it's one of those sports in the past that was, at that time, which was pretty unattainable, but it became quite, and with the history of Eastbourne, which is still uncovered, but there are quite some famous wrecks out there. The Consolation, HMS Consolation, which lies off the harbour, I've got the log on that. That's never been found. Although the HMS Resolution was found about 4 or 5 years ago, kept quite secret. That was found by a couple of scuba divers that went down for some fishing gear. That a couple of guys in Norman's Bay, Ron and Graham, they got hooked up. Now these guys are now old fishermen. That when I was in that age at that time, around 1970, 70, I think that was around 75, we got called to go down, and my mate Johnny Clark I was diving with had got hooked up big time, and they couldn't get the trawl up, big otter trawl. So we went down and we went straight onto a Liberator, American Liberator bomber, all there, tail end just off, but quite fascinating dive, that, quite shallow dive in fact. Another story surrounding that, and which the RAF we keep the records. One of the guys was with us, Brian Bennett. He wrote off because he's quite an authority on World War II aircraft. He wrote off, and they were pleased because they could now. It was given down as going off a Hastings, coming back from a bombing raid. It was damaged. It was in the dark. It's a wonder anything was written up. But they thanked us because they could change their records, because that wasn't. I didn't think it was there. Then the following year, we got called down there again for Ron and Graham, and a Lancaster bomber had crashed down there during, obviously, World War II, and one of its Merlin engines had shot off, and off the wing, when the wing snapped, and catapulted over away from the main wreck, and they were hung up on that, which I've got bits and pieces of that in my shed in my garage, oil pump, just to prove that it was there. It later got raised by a guy called Dave that I knew from Hastings, and it to this day lays out at one of the scrap yards at the back of Howsham. It unfortunately laid there. I mean, when Colin Huggett wrote the book, The Water's Edge, I told him about this, and Sandy Donnell, who's come in the shop, he was doing all the photography for the book. I told him about this, and he went and hunted it, and there's a photograph in his book, The Water's Edge, showing this engine that we got the trawl off, yeah. Then the other one up off at Hollywell, that was 120 deepest I'd ever been, with a guy called Dave Acker. Great musician, great singer, dear, dear friend. I will emphasise Dave is a lovely man. I scuba dive with him a lot. We holidayed a lot together, done lots of stuff together, Dave and I. Great scuba diver. And yeah, that's good. But there's a lot of history lies off here, submarines, and sadly, and then you've got the historic wreck, the Nymph, off of Burling Gap. A lot of stories of Burling Gap. I dived off there a lot because my cousin used to winch his boat, bless his heart, Brian, up the cliffs there, and he used to get hung up, so we used to go off there. Some interesting ground off there, still to be discovered. very interesting there. That wreck showed itself, or they believe it was part of it, in the big hurricane storms we had a lot of years back now, and it washed part of this galleon up shore, and then it shot it back when the second quieter hurricane of those, it dragged it back out to sea and buried it again. But it came ashore. It was all the inner casing of the way they used to make these galleons were double skinned, with big, massive, like big bolts going through them. But then you had the Ariadne is another one out there. The Oceana, they're getting all the gold off of that when she got torpedoed. You had the Barnhill. So a lot of these places I dived back in those days. Yeah, off the light tower. That's an interesting ground to dive off there. We dived it one time out there, which is about 6.5, 7 miles out. 49 feet depth on a full high tide. Yeah, you wouldn't believe it, would you? That's why it's there, because the ground comes up. Certain low tides, when the tides go right out, the long tides, the area will swirl, the sea will swirl, because it's hitting the peak of the rock formations. So with the currents, it swirls. You want to see it. It goes around fast. Fascinating out there, all the way through there. I done a sub-aqua course, my British sub-aqua course, when the club was going out of the Fisherman's Club, which originated from Pevensey Bay, I might add. The Aqua Club was originally in Pevensey Bay, was the sub-aqua club. We just had a little club down there, and they've now gone into the angling club, I might add, as we're speaking now. A friend of mine lives over the back here, Mickey No Nails, he dives from. But in those days, it was an independent club, like a lot of clubs were around Eastbourne, like around the British Isles. I got roped into being secretary. Nobody else wanted the job. That was basically it. And I nominate Chris Erridge. I second that. Bang, I've got the job. No big do's about that. So I thought, while I'm doing it, I'll do it. I'll have a go 100%. And I thought, well, the British Sub-Aqua Club, if you dive in the world at those times, I don't know what the rules are now. I'd imagine they're still the same. Because I know they're still the same, as anybody can buy a boat and anybody can scuba dive in the British Isles without any licence. No licence whatsoever. But you cannot do it abroad, in France or whatever. There was only 5 governing bodies in the world. You could dive there, but you had to have a passport to say that you had trained to be a scuba diver. Now, to get that, you wanted to be in the British Sub-Aqua Club, so it made sense. But I encouraged them to go into it. And it opened so many, many doors. We went down to HMS Dolphin when it was active, the submarine base. Well, no other independent club was allowed in, but we were. We went down, had a long weekend, stayed with the Matlows down. They went to all the courses. They wouldn't allow us to go in the diving 100-foot tank that they trained the submariners in. But that was what the British, that's why we went in. The club now, I don't know much about the Eastbourne Club now. In fact, if it's still running out of the Fisherman's Club. But I do know that another club, I forget what it's called now, Sussex Divers or something, is out of the Angling Club. They welcome with open arms, because obviously they bring a body of people and they're there for the fishermen, because if they get hung up, so that makes sense. But British Sub-Aqua Club had no days in it. It was quite a good club, it really was, good bunch of guys. But I broke away from that from, shall we say, political reasons, which I wouldn't want to put out on camera. And I just went, the remaining time that I died with a bunch of 4 or 5 guys, Johnny Clark, Dave Acker, and a couple of other guys. We done our own stuff. You know, lots of good ground to dive off. I would recommend anybody to dive off of Eastbourne. Forget Greece, forget the Caribbean. Out there is where it's at. History's still to be discovered. There we are, that's that one on that one. There's one last story for that camera still rolling. Terry Norwood, I hope you're going to buy this. I'm going to make sure you get this DVD. Keep this one on. Because there was a prima donna diver, if ever there was one. He comes to see me at my old barber shop, wanting to do it. Now, Terry's quite a fit guy, quite well known, and was once skipper of the Willingdon Golf Course. So, hierarchy Terry Norwood, Mr. Muscles, after I'd broken away from the diving club because of, shall we say, political reasons, as I said before, Terry had now done his 1 or 2 tests and had started diving, and suddenly I was non-entity, I was nothing. And he got interviewed by the radio once, Oh, you're in the British Sub-Aqua Club? Yes, I'm in the British Sub-Aqua Club. He went on to proclaim his diving and everything and downed Chris Erridge, i.e. me, as being a cowboy diver. He'd set the club up. And I'd always wanted to pay Terry back and was once going to scatter over the Willingdon golf course a load of misdemeanours of his youth appertaining to motorcycle offences. But he got hold of the paperwork and I was going to print thousands of these. I was going to scatter them all over the Willingdon golf course to pay him back for that remark he made about me. So here's my payback time, Terry. Please leave this in, Tom. Anyway, he was a good diver, old Terry. Prima donna. Eastbourne United, I could put direction of a lot of guys. In fact, one of their players has just passed away, Frank Woolman, and I believe Ken played his brother as well. But back in those days when Reg Pope was a goalie, and he was once managed, well, I think it was twice managed by England. I'm not a football guy, so from memory's sake, and especially when in the barber shop where Barry and I served our apprenticeship, they used to have crowd control there on a Saturday. It was just like any of the big major league football teams that you see. But in those days, thousands used to go down to United, turnstiles at different entrances of that wonderful football ground, which also was a sports ground where all the school sports took place, all the track events and everything. It was set up for everything. It was a wonderful ground. Wonderful memories of that neighbourhood anyway. I lived around that neighbourhood. But there were many famous football guys that come out of there and managers, as a Ron Greenwood, for example, went on to manage England, etc. And a lot of good guys. And there's still a lot of those guys about if you ever wanted, if Dave Cosham, for example, and Chris Cunningham, a lot of guys. Oh, I could go on, Dave Sargent, especially Dave, Henry Gocher, a lot of guys, Dougie Kenwood. Oh, there's so many of them. If they ever see this, if I haven't mentioned it, I'm sorry, but they youth football, they would handle this conversation a bit more than me, because I never really got around the football game that much. But other stuff, obviously. Yeah, but Eastbourne United has got a massive history. Then the Saffrons has, with a lot of events, a lot of stuff. And that was a good musical when we done the blues up there. That was, you'd have loved that. I know I've mentioned that before, but I will. You had guys like Dave Lockyer, who went on to be the secretary of the Royal Golf Course. He's another one you could interview because he had the history of Ted Hyde, who wrote the Fisherman's books. Ted Hyde, he's another guy to see football and cricket. His great uncle, I don't know, probably three greats. Once bowled Grace out, became an international cricket player out of the Saffrons. And in Ted's book that he's got on cricketers, Sons of Australia, Jesse Hyde, the guy I'm talking about with Bolger, is in there. The whole chapter of it's in the book. So a lot of famous, he's the guy to see about that, cricket of Eastbourne. And as I say, Dave Lockyer, one or two others. And you could go into hockey of Eastbourne, there's guys I could introduce you with that history. Rovers Cycling Club, there's another one. 1800. Clive Willis is a guy I went to school with. He was deeply inside. Charles Robson was their secretary, very famous guy, appertaining. Sadly, he's passed away, but Clive's still with us. And that club still goes, 1800s, like the rowing club, 1800s. They've got massive history. Yeah, their secretary comes in the shop. Yeah. One that your dad wrote up in his book was the ghost story of Lenny Van Ross, alias Lenny the Magpie, and the ghost story of the Royal Oaken Castle. When Ray King, there's a story in its own. Ray King, yeah, I worked right down there, and one of their main guys, one of their door guys, is being buried today, Frank Shaw, bless him. I worked with Frank on the door, and yeah, there were many stories down Ray King's. But Ray went on to take the Royal Oaken Castle in his days of Kings. And he also had Glyndebourne, not Glyndebourne, let's get past that one. But yeah, Lenny managed that, but Lenny was very nervous, immaculately clean guy, very meticulous at his work, and but was frightened of ghosts, and there's many ghost stories of West Ham, Bemsey. So they set Lenny up that night, and it stuck a gargoyle in his car seat. Lenny never locked his car because he'd like to get out of the pub and walk straight into his car because he didn't like the dark. And they chose a perfect night with the moon shining and this gargoyle sitting there waiting for him to open the door so he could hear the screams in Birmingham, you know. So they all made excuses that night to leave the pub early. Now, it had happenings in the pub when going in the following day. Certain things would move, the optics wouldn't be there, or the chain was always pulling. When you went upstairs, went along the landing, there was a toilet at the end where the steps went down to where the courtyard was. And when you locked the boozer up, you had to lock from the courtyard up along past his toilet down to the end, down the stairs and out. So this night, poor Lenny got left on his own. And as he's going along the landing after locking up the courtyard, back up the stairs, past the toilet chain goes and he scooted. Well, when your dad heard that, and he wrote that in that book, Have I Got a Story for You? Oh, that's basically it. I might have got one or two bits wrong, but basically that was it. He went to his car, pulled it out. And of course, they chosen a night of the full moon. And the full moon, as he opened the door, was right on this gargoyle. That sticks in the mind, yeah. Yeah, I suppose. But there were many with the shop. King's Country Club, yeah. Well, I've got to be honest with you, Tom. I've not really supposed in those days of Barry and I kicking off, suddenly we're businessmen. And, you don't have to pay your insurance stamp every week. So we say I got a little bit behind, in all honesty. The lesson to any guys starting out, pay your insurance stamp. And so we had to, I went down there, stuck a dicky bow on. Well, not professing I was a fit guy, but that doesn't. So, yeah, it was a good time. A lot of good musicians played there. I met a lot of great guys, Dale Shannon to Joe Brown, Hot Chocolate, many, 3 Degrees, many stories, a lot of good guys. And comedians, Tommy Cooper. Ella Fitzgerald played there. Unfortunately, I wasn't there that night. But I'd give Ray King his due. He did put some seriously good acts on down there, and it was seriously popular. So much so because King's in its day, and Carol, bless her, she's still with us. And I would recommend speaking with her because she, obviously being his daughter, she could give all this information. But there are a lot of guys I could introduce you to that will give their own stories. Pete Gill, for example, who's a good friend. He was a really good door guy, and he used to put someone or two of the stars up. Lenny Bennett and 1 or 2 others. He lived nearby there, and if they were short of somewhere to stay, Pete would put them up. I still see Peter now, and but they had some wonderful nights down there. And when Prince Charles came down, when the 3 Degrees played on that big do, man, that was massive. CBS, the music people, they had a convention down there one time. That was unbelievable. I worked with those guys. They had their own security, but that was amazing. All I wanted was the shell of Kings. Nothing. They didn't want its sound system. They didn't want its lighting, which upset Alan at the time who ran it. Well, CBS speaks for itself. They're massive worldwide. And they had signed bands like Sad Cafe at that time. And I forget the other one. I'm not sure it was Meridian. But I know Sad Cafe played. They had 3 bands, new wave style bands at that time. And they put their own catwalk in, they put their own lighting system, put all their own sound system in. It was amazing. And they had a massive party up the Grand Hotel afterwards. And but what a night that was. So that was it. 3 seriously good boxing evenings down there, till there was a bit of trouble one night and Ray wouldn't do it again. That was a shame. Because a lot of fighters, boxers, Maurice Hope, that had all been world champions, they all came for a hire on the top table, etc. So it was very well run. So many events down there, many happy campers, so to speak, which it was, campsite, which started off with small caravans. Ray and a guy called Eric. And then they built a small club, and then it was such a success, they built a massive one over the top of it. Still keeping the same club underneath. You probably wouldn't remember it now. But a lot of good musicians played there. I just wish there were big criticisms of I wish the Arndale hadn't been built that way. I wish it had been built a more, they didn't think of the back streets much, which they could have made muse places out of, block paved them over and put trees in, made it very continental Parisian, if that's all right. Well, you know, they could have done that, made more bistros and again music, very, but they just sort of forgot him and they became a bit, even their own road. Our own road back in 1970, the traffic flowed both ways up there, would you believe? And you could park. Then bit by bit, that all changed. Yeah, before the Arndale was built, you see. The Arndale was built in the 70s. And all that was set that the first phase originally was going to be our old barber shop knocked down. All that lot was going to be knocked down. All of Ashford Road there was going to be bulldozed, but there was such a hue and a cry. And then the second original phase was where we are now, was going to be all gone. So it was going to go on, but it got stopped and never. It's being spoken about now in the year 2015 as being extended. But back in 1970, all that lot would have been, had they gone through with it, been bulldozed. The swimming pool, I would say, was a bit of disappointment, which I had an associate. It was the last diving I ever did there. Quite a story to that. I was never happy with that swimming pool. A lot of guys weren't. They wouldn't allow the Scuba club to dive, do their training there, where we trained all those years at the Sovereign. I am outspoken about that. That was wrong. That was totally wrong. Even the own Eastbourne Swimming Club had to hire their own cabinet to put their Eastbourne trophies in. What is that about? Oh, I knew a lot of guys down there, Dave Crouch, for example. When I built the second phase of the swimming pool, well, there's a story and a half there. I don't know what I should tell you, but that was crazy. Absolute crazy. Never been happy with that place. It could have been, really, they should have looked at Crystal Palace and built all the way across it when they had all that land before those houses went. Built a multi-complex for old and youth and like, you know, and put a big dome over it like the Dutch did, where they, like that. Go to Crystal Palace, which had been built for years when I went to, it's Olympic-style swimming pool. Well, why don't they build Olympic-style? We're near two ports. But crazy, absolutely nuts. It's prefabricated. It was always having trouble with its upkeep. I've done a massive, well, that one better not come out on camera, that one. I'll tell you a scuba diving story. That was my last dive. Well, I can tell it and you can rub it off, but I'll be a bit careful. But they called me down. Dave Crouch used to work on the door with Dan Kings. He was a water polo player, and he was manager down there by then. I got back to the shop one day and Barry said, Dave's phoning up, can you call in on your way back? This was on a Friday. I called in to see Dave before going about to work, and he said, come and look at this. And they'd done the extension pool, the fun pool and all of that. And it was full of water. They'd filled it up. Okay, you swim, but you don't fill a swimming pool up while everything's still in there. Wheelbarrows, every figuration of a building site, putt logs, scaffold, bricks, everything was in the pool still. Brand new tiles. So I went around and saw him, and I saw a guy called Ellis I knew, and I said, man, what is this? He said, it gets better, Chris. If you've worked here, I said, well, to me it looks a bit prefabricated. I said, yeah. And he said, but... So along comes this guy from a Hull engineering company, Hull Thermal Engineering Company, who's the guy in charge. I've got all the report upstairs, and so I've got all this to back up. And he's going to have the grand opening and everything within 2 or 3 weeks' time. And they'd filled it up, and they couldn't empty the pool. And so the guy comes to see me, and he's full of it, and he's trying to be over top of me. Oh, you do this, you do that, and you do that. I said, we start this conversation again. So we got it redirected, and I said, what idiot filled this up? Well, of course it was him. And I've only just taken the job. I said, well, what'd you fill it up with water for, with all that lot? I said, it was going to do with me, or you want me to do a diving job? What's a dive? Well, what had happened, they couldn't exit the water, so down the deep end was a box under the water, went down about like that to the floor. But there's a surface, and it was about like that. And it was about 24 Allen key screws. And they'd been stuffing stones in, holding their breath, going down, trying to undo it. They had exits, but they weren't operating. This was the main one, so some cross-figuration of why it wouldn't work. And so I got the tanks, so Freddie Howson, bless him, he loaned me a couple of his tanks because mine were out of date. I was not now diving. And so these were the last dives I had, was there. I spent all Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning under the water, sorting this problem out. I'd undone the box lid, took the lid off, and there was nothing inside, no pipe. So he said, there must be a pipe. I said, no, there's no pipe. He got told, give us your plans, look at the plans. I said, well, you should be there. I can only get, I'll dig. So I took the end off a file and stabbed all the concrete, trying to find this pipe that was that round and blue. And I said, well, I'll take a guess that might be it, because there's a little bulge there. Well, not a lot, but should it be in the centre? You know, so cut the ice on it after all that time, Saturday and Sunday. The pipe, once you got to the bottom, dug, the pipe was down that deep, that well. So you can imagine my arm is now at full extent. Well, trying to cut, I found the bung, it had been sabotaged, it had been concreted all in. So I dig all this concrete out with a primitive end of it, got it out, and I kept getting him to get the plant to build up a pressure, so to help push. I said, when this goes, that's going to shoot like a volcano. So every time we got the pipe, we all stood out. Kept digging. I said, well, I can't go any further, because now I've got my arm down this in the box. I'm in the box, upended. You can imagine what sight I looked. I had 2 or 3 tanks waiting there. So I had plenty of air. I wasn't going to go into decompression. I was only in about, I don't know, whatever, foot of water. And this particular time when it did go, it hit the roof. Boy, it went like a volcano. It went everywhere. He was very, very fortunate. And then the waters flowed, and then they could get it and get clean the pool. Then I didn't get paid. And so that particular day, I did get paid. And that's another story. But it was... But it was a week before, and 3 days before, 3 or 4 days before, that's right, because it gave him time to get the money together. And well, I said, well, I'll be, but when she comes down, like Princess Di, when she comes down, I'm going to be here with a load of placards, a load of my mates, with these posters. I haven't been paid yet. So I had to write this report. It's upstairs. But that was the last Scuba diving job. Do you know, Nick, that tea, I forgot the tea and the coffee. What a plonker. What a donut.
Nice and cold now. Don't worry about that.
See, but these guys talk about plonker, and it reminds me of other characters that come in the shop, like Derek Ware, who starred in so many films as a stunt guy. Well, with the great Boat Lancaster. Some mothers do have them. Fools and Horses. There's Mick Oliver who comes in the shop. If you ever see the Fools and Horses, where they're in a nightclub, you know, Otto the doorman, who starred in Bond films and other stuff, rates and stuff. Yeah, he picks Rodney up one day. You ain't got to pitch him right. He's a fireman. Picks him up like that. Where's your card? Where's your memory? He's with me. Otto, says Del Boy. Oh, I didn't know that. He's with my brother. Oh, he's your brother. Puts him. You should have said so. Yeah, he was in quite a few movie bits. But Derek Ware is a lovely, lovely fellow. And if you tap Derek Ware on a computer and see what I've got, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves and all of that, writes of stories, because he was a great a fencer in his own right, and also a theatre fencer. They do pantomimes, for example, and they swish swords about. They would teach him how not to get hurt and all that. But his association with Christopher Lee and many, many, many people. He's a lovely guy. He lives up College Green. Yeah, there's a book in itself. I'd like your dad to do a book on him. I really would, because that would be an interesting story, big time. And some archive stuff I've got on old Bill Johnson, and the demise of the U-boats. He used to come in, he was with Walker RN during World War II, and I've got that upstairs, 40-odd pages of that, the original stuff that he wrote it for his family. I'll tell you, Tom, that's an amazing story. Well, funny enough, one of the guys said the Bodkin Adams stories and that. You've probably heard about that anyway. Like Johnny Guy this morning was in the shop, and he mentioned to me about that. But that I'm skeleton on, because there are a lot of happenings, but they've been written up, and you'd get your references from, Waterstones, for example. When as you go in there, they have that reference all to do to it. But the stories, there are many, many. World War I, 2 aircraft industries in Eastbourne, the aviation. I've got a book on it. the aviation of Eastbourne. One, if it's still there, I've been there. If you go down to Liddell's, so there you are, Liddell's, go into the road next to it, turn left and drive all the way down, right round the back. And it's now protected, I'm told, are the footings of the aircraft hangars, or one of them at least. And they used to build a lot of planes there, and small, early, flyable, wooden runway, for example, I was told. The other one was over where the trams, you heard about the trams, electric trams? That are still in existence, apparently. Well, along the Prince's Park, the part of where they ran is still there. It's still there. But over where the swimming pool was, which was once where they built the seaplanes for the military, for the Navy. So we had two major league, blah, 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 where they went on later to become the big dynamos to create electricity for the trams. All along there, there's countless stories of that. And countless stories of the lifeboats. You're supposed to finish that off.
Yes.